Hello, everyone. This is Liz, live from the Derry Public Library, and as it is Thursday, I'm here to give Hulu and Amazon Prime recommendations. As I often do with Amazon Prime, don't worry, I'm not making it too weird today. We're going to start with Hulu. The first film I'm going to recommend is the 2017 biopic Mary Shelley, starring Elle Fanning as the famous Mary Shelley, the woman who created essentially all of modern horror. If anything, it's actually kind of shocking that it took until 2017 for us to get a biopic of Mary Shelley. Um, it also took us until 2019 to get a biopic of Harriet Tubman. Meanwhile, there's six Transformers movies. But I digress. This is actually directed by a Saudi Arabian director. She directed the film Wadija, and her name is Haifa Al Mansour. I hope I am pronouncing that right. The movie overall, I would say it's a great movie, but it has a lot of good direction. It also has good performances, not only from Elle Fanning, but from Maisie Williams as well, who you probably recognize from Game of Thrones. And again, I just find it strange that there has been kind of an explosion about interest in Mary Shelley recently, but I kind of look at it like, considering what she's contributed to the horror genre and to Western literature canon as a whole, you think there'd be more pop culture about her, but you know, I'll be happy with what we have. Up next, speaking of horror, we're going to go to a real life horror movie called My Friend Dahmer. And yes, that is about Jeffrey Dahmer. So this is based on a graphic novel that was written by, I know this is not his real name, but he goes by Dirk Backderf. That is his pen name. And I am not kidding. He is 100% serious. He grew up and went to school with Jeffrey Dahmer, and they were in fact acquaintances in high school. So this is based on his graphic novel, and he was actually fairly involved with the production of this film. And I think this is a very good adaptation of the book. I know common knowledge is usually the book is always better. Not always. Sometimes it's equal, or I think there are some cases where the adaptation is way better than the book. But actually, my previous recommendation, The Notebook and Kick-Ass, are I think two very good examples of the movie is far better than the source material. But I think this is a good movie. Anne Heche is great as his very neurotic mom, and you actually feel kind of bad because it takes place in small town Ohio in the 70s, and you can't help but wonder, like, man, how much could have been prevented if people had more access to therapists? And I'm blanking on the kid's main name, but he used to be a Disney kid, so this is kind of kin from Kurt Russell going from the computer wore tennis shoes to used cars, only it's Teen Beach Movie to playing a serial killer. But he is fantastic as not playing Jeffrey Dahmer as overly menacing, but just a very disturbed young kid who, unfortunately for a lot of people, is going to go on to do horrific things. But I think it's a good way. If you're have an interest in true crime and serial killers, this is a good personal look at that genre because, as horrific as these people are, once upon a time they were someone's classmate, friend, son, some cases daughter. So yeah, highly recommend My Friend Dahmer. We're going on. 2009's Littlewoods. This is the debut film of Nia DaCosta, who we will eventually see her follow-up feature, which is the I think it is not so much a remake as it is a continuation of the Candyman saga. Someday I'll get that movie. I'm just bummed. COVID ruined so much of my movie going this year. But I think Littlewoods is a fantastic movie and incredibly underrated. So it stars Tessa Thompson and Lily James as two sisters. I don't know if it's biological sisters or just sisters via being raised together, but Lily James is trying to raise a son with an absent father, finds that she is pregnant again and doesn't really want to be pregnant. And Tessa Thompson is just trying to get out of this small rural community and get out of running drugs for the sake of it's the only way to make money. And their two problems collide, and it's mainly about how they are trying to help each other both solve their issues. It is, I think, it's a good crime thriller. It's also a good movie about what people do when they're desperate for just to get out of their situation. Up next, a very well-known movie, The Color Purple. A lot of people are shocked to find out that this was directed by Steven Spielberg. But yes, he went from one of his darkest movies, Indiana Jones: The Temple of Doom, to what is a sad but ultimately uplifting story in The Color Purple. Also, it is hard to realize that this was Whoopi Goldberg's feature film debut, and she's amazing in this. She carries this entire movie playing Celie. And also the debut of Oprah Winfrey as Sophia. I really like this movie. I know it's been described to some as mawkish. I do not think that's the case. I think Steven Spielberg is very respectful of the material. And if there's one thing Steven Spielberg can do, sorry, my lisp is coming back, he knows how to direct actors, and he knows how to let a scene just naturally come into being. He knows now not to force anybody. And again, I would say hard recommend on The Color Purple. If you've never seen it, you should. And finally, we're going to get out of the kind of sad territory with a comedy, and that's Mel Brooks's Robin Hood Men in Tights. Well, I don't think this is as good as his like prime era stuff, which is your Young Frankensteins, your Blazing Saddles, you're the Producers. This is still really funny and definitely has a loyal cult following. Carrie Elways plays Robin Hood. Young Dave Chappelle is in this movie. It's really funny. Again, I wouldn't say it ranks among his absolute greatest, but it's still a good laugh. I mean, I was about to say there's no such thing as a bad Mel Brooks movie, and then I remembered, wait, Dracula Dead and Loving It exists, so oops. But still, Robin Hood Men in Tights is a great time. On to Amazon Prime. If you're looking for something for kids, there are two fairly interesting films I have to recommend. One is an adaptation of they're both adaptations of children's stories, but one is... it's weird, and that's Little Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland. So this is an animated movie. This movie was, I believe, a US-Japanese co-production, and people worked on for years to get this made. Actually, Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli fame worked on this movie before Studio Ghibli was a thing, and he calls it one of the worst experiences of his life. The finished product, wouldn't call it great, but I do think as a kid's film, it's got that darkness that I remember from kids' films growing up. I grew up mainly in the 80s and early 90s, so I had a lot of Don Bluth. And that was definitely kind of it wasn't all sweet and sugary and happy. I also think, it's visually inventive. I think the colors are really good, and the story is engaging enough. I just like to recommend animation, especially that is not Disney, because especially in America, not so much around the world, but in America, Disney just sucks up all of the rest of children's entertainment, and I feel to the detriment of a lot of other talented creators, especially Leica Studios in the United States. So if you want to check out an interesting kids film, I would say Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, or if you're my age, watch it for a nostalgia, does it really hold up thing. Overall it does, mainly because I watched it when I was a little older, and I'm like, this is kind of weird, but it's also kind of neat. The other one I have to recommend, definitely I think a much better movie, and that is Spike Jonze' adaptation of Where the Wild Things Are. So we all know Where the Wild Things Are, the very famous Maurice Sendak book, The Boy Who Goes to an Island and Meets Monsters. This is an expanded version of that story. There's a lot of heart to this. It's for a movie about, wild things and monsters, there's a lot of heart to this, and it's a great voice cast. You have James Gandolfini as the main wild thing, and just, rest in peace. I think it speaks to how good that man was as an actor, that he can bring so much character and so much both kindness and ferocity to this, creature that's not even real. Lauren Ambrose of 6 Feet Under fame is also in it. Also Catherine O'Hara, one of the funniest people alive. For Forrest Whitaker, Chris Cooper. It's a loaded cast, and usually I am not the biggest supporter of celebrity-studded casts for voice work, but considering they have to voice these creatures that are moving, they're actually very good at it. So I say credit where credit's due. This is an all-star cast that actually manages to know how to voice act, and they know that voice acting isn't just saying stuff into a microphone. And again, I think it goes without saying, since it's Spike Jonze, it's visually one of the most interesting films I've seen in a long time. I've seen a lot of movies. Definitely one of the most visually interesting children's films. On to A very little seen movie, but if you're familiar with indie scene, you probably know who she is. This is Kelly Reichardt's first movie, or one of her first movies, River of Grass. I am a big fan of her work. I love Meek's Cutoff. I love Wendy and Lucy. I am still waiting to see First Cow. That was another, I was going to see it at the Red River Theater, and then COVID came and knocked all the pieces off the board. But yeah, I would say if you are a fan of her work, or just you're a fan of independent cinema, I would watch River of Grass. Final two movies. The first is Tim Burton's Big Fish. And I love Big Fish for a number of reasons. I think it's definitely one of Tim Burton's more mature movies. And it's one where he's not relying on what in 2003 had become a shtick for him, which is his signature look for a film. And there's nothing wrong with having a signature look, but it kind of felt, especially after stuff like Planet of the Apes, that he hadn't really evolved beyond it, or evolved it in any way. So Big Fish is where he does evolve a bit as a filmmaker, and rather than making a story with quirky characters, he kind of settles down and makes a really heartfelt movie about fathers and sons. Ewan McGregor is fantastic in this. It's also got a very light color palette, which is not something you usually see in a Tim Burton movie. Every now and then he pulls it out. Does for this. He does for Edward Scissorhands, the pastoral suburbs. He does for Big Eyes as well. But, I mean, I've been very hit or miss on Tim Burton, especially after the year 2000. But this is, I would say, Tim Burton at his best. And when I tell people, like, this is what he really is as a filmmaker, Big Fish is one of the movies I point to. Also, it's not streaming, but I would say if you want to check it out from the library, Big Eyes is great as well. And final movie to recommend is from my man, Lucio Fulci. I have to just give a shout out to City of the Living Dead. What is it about? I'm not really sure. I've seen this movie a bunch of times. Something about zombies and the dead coming back to life, which is something you see in a lot of his movies. But if you like horror, if you like those early 80s, late 70s Italian splatter punk movies, City of the Living Dead has got some great deaths in it. Especially one where, in order to create the illusion of someone throwing up their own intestines, the actor had to keep sheep innards in their mouth and slowly spit them out. I really hope they got paid well for that, but considering it's an Italian production in the early 80s, I'm not sure. But again, this is not a movie for everybody, but I do know that I have horror movie fans watching this, so I wanted to say, hey, if you want some of the weird, down and dirty stuff that you'd see in an old VHS rental shop, City of the Living Dead is on Prime. Alrighty, that is all for today. I will see you tomorrow for Freebie Friday. Have a good day.